Hello, I am Matty Dalrymple, and welcome to From Expertise to Authority, where we examine how you can build your professional presence for a sideline or second act. More resources are available at theindieauthor.com, and that's indie with a Y, including a downloadable worksheet that you can use to document your journey from expertise to authority. In this episode, we'll be exploring responsibility and reputation. What happens when the performance of authority replaces the substance of expertise? When you've spent years building authority in your area of expertise, there's a natural instinct to protect it. You've earned the credibility, developed the depth, put in the work. Now that you have a reputation as someone who knows what they're talking about, the last thing you want to do is undermine that perception. That instinct is understandable, but it can lead you somewhere counterproductive if you're not careful, because there's an important difference between protecting your authority and honoring your expertise. Expertise is about substance, what you actually know. Authority is about perception, how you're seen. Both carry a responsibility to present your perspective and advice as accurately as possible. But as your authority grows, and as your audience expands and your reputation solidifies, you may find yourself with an increasing incentive to conceal mistakes or overstate your certainty because you have more at stake. The irony is that this is precisely the moment when these choices do the most harm. Not because the nature of the error or the overstatement is any different than it would have been earlier in your career, but because the scope of its impact has changed. The more authoritative you're perceived to be, the more people will act on what you tell them without much vetting or due diligence of their own. An expert with a small audience who gets something wrong or overstates a claim affects a few people. An authority with a large, trusting following who does the same and doesn't correct course can send that entire audience in the wrong direction. Years ago, during my corporate career, I was preparing for a presentation with a colleague, and we were discussing how to handle Q&A, where a presenter's control over the content is thinnest, and the conversation turned to what to do if one of us realized mid-presentation or during the questions that we'd gotten a fact wrong. My colleague's advice: don't circle back to it. His feeling was that correcting yourself draws attention to the error. Furthermore, he argued, revisiting the mistake makes it a bigger deal than it needs to be. I understood the impetus for this approach. The presentation was intended to present us as authorities on the topic, but I wasn't comfortable with it. If we knew we'd given the audience incorrect information, I believed we had a responsibility to correct it. Not with a dramatic mea culpa, just a quick, matter-of-fact acknowledgement. I want to correct something I said earlier. My colleague was thinking about how to protect our reputation for authority. I was thinking about how to honor the responsibility of our expertise. Those two things look identical a lot of the time, but in that scenario, they pointed in opposite directions. He eventually agreed to my approach, but the tension he'd identified was real, and I've watched it play out many times since, not just in presentations, but in the broader landscape of how experts and authorities communicate with the people they're trying to serve. The temptation to prioritize the appearance of authority over the responsibility of expertise takes more than one form. Sometimes it's failing to correct a factual error, as in the scenario my colleague and I discussed, but just as often it's presenting a matter of preference or circumstance as though it were an indisputable truth. And this version can be harder to recognize both for the authority and for the audience. I've observed both in the independent publishing space where I've built much of my own authority. Publishing is full of decisions that depend on an individual author's goals, resources, genre, and audience. Whether to publish wide or stay exclusive to a single retailer, how to price your work, how much to invest in advertising, which social media platform to prioritize. These are decisions shaped by context, and responsible advice acknowledges the context. But the temptation to project certainty leads some authorities to present their preferred approach as the only viable one, flattening genuine complexity into false simplicity. The audience, many of whom are still developing their own knowledge and don't yet have the wherewithal to push back, take the advice at face value. And the higher the authority's profile, the more people are making decisions based on that advice without questioning whether it applies to their particular situation. Whether the issue is an uncorrected error or an overstated claim, the underlying problem is the same. The performance of authority has become disconnected from the substance of expertise. And over time, that disconnect becomes visible because your audience isn't static, they're learning too. As they develop their own understanding of the nuances, they begin to see where the confident declarations don't hold up. And the people who've been paying the most attention are the ones most likely to notice, and the ones whose trust is hardest to rebuild. The faster path to perceived authority turns out to be the less durable one. Projecting certainty on every point may attract followers quickly, but it creates a relationship built on the assumption that you're always right, an assumption that becomes harder to sustain the longer your audience has been learning alongside you. I have never lost an audience's trust when I've corrected myself. When I've circled back to fix a factual error in a presentation, maybe a date I misstated, a detail I got wrong, a recent development I hadn't incorporated, the response has been a nod of appreciation. It would be a different story if I were getting foundational things wrong or fessing up to error after error. But for the kind of reasonable misses that happen in any setting, an honest acknowledgement signals something the audience values, that I take the accuracy of what I'm telling them more seriously than the smoothness of my delivery. And the larger the audience, the more that signal matters, because the people in the room are trusting me to get it right precisely because they see me as an authority. The same principle extends beyond presentations. When I write an article that explores a question rather than delivering an answer, or when I frame a recommendation with appropriate caveats rather than presenting it as the only viable approach, I'm making a choice about the kind of authority I want to build. It's slower, it's less dramatic, it doesn't produce the kind of quotable declarations that travel well in social media, but it produces something more valuable, an audience that trusts me not because they think I'm always right, but because they know I'm always trying to be accurate and helpful, and that I'll tell them when I'm not sure. This principle shapes my consulting work as well. I'm not looking for clients who want definitive, authoritative answers handed down from on high. Do X, don't do Y, this is the only way. I'm looking for clients who want informed, expert help navigating their own questions. The distinction matters because the best answer for one person, in one set of circumstances, is rarely the best answer for another, and a consultant who pretends otherwise is prioritizing the appearance of authority over the reality of the situation. The most productive consulting relationships I've had are the ones where the client and I are thinking together, drawing on my expertise and their knowledge of their own goals and constraints, rather than the ones where I'm simply issuing directives. This isn't about performing humility as a strategy, any more than performing certainty is a strategy that serves your audience well. It's about recognizing that the people you're trying to reach deserve the best information that you can give them, and the best information sometimes includes acknowledging the limits of what you know. The professionals whose authority endures aren't the ones who never make mistakes or never change their minds. They're the ones whose audience trusts that when they speak with confidence, the confidence is earned, and that when they're uncertain, they'll say so. That trust is built slowly through hundreds of small choices, correcting the error instead of hoping nobody noticed, framing the recommendation with honest caveats instead of false certainty, acknowledging a matter of preference as a matter of preference rather than presenting it as a settled truth. The appearance of authority is something you can construct. The responsibility of expertise is something you have to live. And the audience that stays with you, the one that deepens into genuine relationships rather than passive followers, is the one that can tell the difference. If you'd like to read this article, you'll find that at Matty Dalrymple on Substack, and you'll find video at Matty Dalrymple on YouTube. And you can subscribe to the From Expertise to Authority podcast on all major podcast platforms. And if you'd like support developing a personalized pathway from expertise to authority for yourself, please check out my consulting service at theindieauthor.com/authority. If you're an event organizer, I'd love to share with your community a framework they can use to develop their own path. And if you'd like to get in touch, just drop me a note at Matty@mattydalrymple.com. Thank you for listening.